Good evening. I'm Eric Siegel here at the Harn Museum of Art. I'm Director of Education, and it's my privilege to welcome you tonight on behalf of our director, Dr. Leanne Chesterfield, here with us this evening. This evening's program is made possible by the HESCA program, the Harn Eminent Chair in Art History HESCA program, which is organized out of the School of Art and Art History, and which brings eminent scholars of art history, museum professional, art critics, and so forth here to the museum. Here to the university to both engage the museum and the College of the Arts together and to raise our level of discussion around art and art history, to bring new ideas and new approaches and new thinking around art. So we're very excited whenever we present a HESCA program. I'm particularly excited tonight because our speaker is truly wonderful, but it's not my honor to introduce our speaker. That will be in a moment. Before I begin, by my colleague Rachel Silveri, before I begin, I want to just share with you that at the Harn Museum, everyone has a place and is welcome in our community. We know that audience members have different needs, so we share the following. The program will be about an hour, and it will be for an audience that's largely quiet until Q&A and seated. So if you feel that you need to get up and talk and go out and move around, we welcome you to sit in back where you won't disturb others and where you can exit the doors if you need to. Members of our audience come from all walks of life, including regular attendees we know well who may exhibit unconventional but safe behavior. So we want to embrace them as part of our audience as well. If you do need assistance, there's lots of staff members here in the auditorium and outside, and we're all wearing badges, and we'd be happy to help you with any concerns you might have. That statement you saw was developed in collaboration with the UF Office of ADA Affairs. So very important for our thinking about audiences. Wanted to share with you that tonight's lecture is presented, as you already know, in conjunction with Silver Linings, celebrating the Spelman Art Collection, which opened on Tuesday. It's really fabulous. Some of you were already visiting it this evening, and since Tuesday, others of you will visit it after the lecture because the museum is open until 9 o'clock. We have a reception immediately after the lecture in the space adjacent to the exhibition, and we would love for you to join us for the reception to continue conversation and to look at art. This is our very first program for the exhibition. There are a lot of great programs coming up. I welcome you to visit this webpage. Just go to the Harn website and look for exhibitions. You'll find the Silver Linings page. We have tonight's lecture. We have an educator workshop for K-12 educators. We have a wind down on March 27th with live jazz. We are super excited about our artist in residence who will take up residence March 6th and be an artist in a studio in the exhibition 3 days a week and during major museum events such as museum nights on April 10th. So lots of events. Please visit the webpage to find out more. Let's see, let me go back here. We invite you to explore that to learn more. Let me now ask you to join me in welcoming a scholar who will introduce tonight's speaker, Darby English. Tonight will be introduced by Rachel Silveri. Dr. Silveri is Assistant Professor of Modern Art here at the School of Art and Art History. Rachel.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. It is my honor to introduce Darby English, the Carl Darling Buck Professor of Art History at the University of Chicago. Professor English is the author of 4 books, including Charles Ray, Adam and Eve, published by Gregory R. Miller and Company in 2024, To Describe a Life, Notes from the Intersection of Art and Race Terror, published by Yale University Press in 2019, 1971, A Year in the Life of Color, published by the University of Chicago Press in 2016, and How to See a Work of Art in Total Darkness, published by MIT Press in 2007. He is the co-editor of 3 additional books, including, among others, Blackness at MoMA, published by the Museum of Modern Art in 2019, Art History and Emergency, published by Yale University Press in 2016, and Kara Walker, Narratives of a Negress, published by MIT Press in 2002. These are many books. They are award-winning and critically acclaimed books. So among others, Blackness at MoMA, produced during Professor English's 6-year term as an adjunct curator in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at MoMA, was a 2020 Prose Award finalist, a New York Times notable book, and received recognition as an Art News Best Book of the Decade. To Describe a Life, Notes from the Intersection of Art and Race Terror was awarded both the 2020 Frank Jewett Mather Award by the College Art Association and the 2020 Book Prize from the Association for the Study of the Arts of the Present. Elsewhere, Professor English's writings have appeared in the Art Bulletin, Art Forum, Art Journal, Open, Art Margins, and The Guardian, as well as exhibition catalogs produced by the National Gallery of Art, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, or LACMA, and the U.S. Pavilion for the Venice Biennial. He has received grants from the American Academy in Rome, the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the Clark Art Institute, the Getty Research Institute, the Institute for Advanced Study, and the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Humanities Center. Beyond all of these many accomplishments, I would like to add that Professor English is one of the most thoughtful, careful, and creative writers on art of our current moment. And indeed, it is for this very reason that I was thrilled to help bring him to campus, not only to speak in relation to the exhibition Silver Linings, but to meet with the students of my grad seminar, Writing Art Histories. Quote, "An encounter with art is an encounter with difference, really with differences of greatly varying kinds and forces," Professor English has written, elsewhere stating, quote, "For a time anyway, art foists confusion on anyone seriously trying to deal with what it deals out. In this space of difference, of complexity, this space of confusion and sense-making, this encounter with art, Professor English brings an open mind, an attentive eye, a willingness to think and rethink, a slow and careful description, and a patience in arriving at what is eventually revealed as deep, critical insight. It is my pleasure and privilege to invite you all to share that space tonight. Before whatever slides Professor English will show us, in those pockets of uncertainty that accompany all art, I nevertheless rest certain that in following his steps, we are in for a treat. Please join me in welcoming Darby English.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel. That was extremely generous and very appreciated. I have a mic of my own, just trying to figure out what to do with this one. No. $5, anyone who wants it. Okay. Okay. I want to not waste any time, but I also don't want to miss an opportunity to thank all of you for being here on a Thursday evening. It's a beautiful Thursday evening here in Gainesville. And especially to thank, feels like Austin city limits when those lights are on. This won't be that fun, I apologize. I wanted to thank Eric and Rachel for the invitation to join you. It's a real honor to be on the program, and especially in connection with an institution like Spelman, which I esteem so much. Also want to thank Dulce and Errol for some really generous and warm hospitality throughout the day, and it's just been great. It's been great so far and seems to get better by the minute. So I have a little bit to say by way of just giving you a feeling for where I'm coming from, or sort of where you find me. I'm in between large research projects. I'm not going to speak out of any sort of deep archival engagements with a given artist or a given period of art history or whatever. I've been thinking for a number of years about how I do what I do, and ways to open it up, not only to more and different kinds of audiences, but to what feels to me anyway like uh, a more straightforward engagement with what artists put into their art for us to receive or fail to receive, whatever the case may be. But I'm feeling more and more interested in where the artist is coming from and how I can facilitate that in my work. Um, so I'm speaking tonight. I'm going to use a lot of the words I, you, and we. I haven't done that self-consciously, and I'm not doing it to moralize, to tell anyone about themselves or about how they do what they do in relation to art. Um, I'm trying to speak to um, shared practices of being art fans, art lovers, art makers, art scholars, teachers of art, curators. Um, Whatever your orientation to art, I presume that it involves some amount of commitment. Maybe that commitment is powered by some historical passion, um, some feeling of love for art or need for art, and it's that actually how we operate enthusiastic um, uh, enthusiasms around and about art, especially when we're making knowledge about it. So probably my primary audience in this phase of my work is people who, no matter what they do, have the power to influence the public understandings of art. Anybody with a capacity to influence how another person outside of themselves and their experience thinks about art is who I'm talking to. Whether you're an academic or not is immaterial. So if you have, and I say this to my students, I say this to my first year undergraduates, when you get out of the University of Chicago with a BA in art history, you have acquired the right to work your will over the public meanings of art because you have a credential from an august institution. The same goes for undergraduate majors of the University of Florida. And as I get older and more mature, I take that more and more literally and more seriously. And so, what I'm going to say to you, it's a bit heavy. I hope there's not too much wet blanket feeling in the room by the end of the thing, but it's coming from that concern. And it's what happens when I sit down and think about what I can do as an art historian to make that concern useful or to try to make it useful for other people. So that's the preamble. I'm sure I'll wish I had said it differently in an hour, but that's what I got. Okay, that's what I have. Okay, I took these pictures in the exhibition this morning, so they're not professional. I'm going to start reading now. It's because I love them that I took the decision to think about Beverly Buchanan's works in this exhibition. In Silver Linings, there are two of the objects that I mean. Small, seemingly improvised, hand-hewn sculptures that the artist called shacks. And one of these, the example on the right, is quite like a birdhouse, as you see. This is a kind of table work, a little taller than a cereal box. Its hardware store elements bound together with glue, solder, tacks, and then painted, or not. On the example at left, the door doesn't open. That's solid sheet metal behind the door. It's soldered at the left edge to another, um, unmodified sheet of metal. It looks to teeter on its piers, but it's quite stably rooted into a sheet of heavier metal that serves as both ground and pedestal. Onto the birdhouse shack, Buchanan fixed a curious element on the left front. You have to see this from the side to see how out of place it seems, at least in a realist representation of this kind of architecture. It may or may not be a structural necessity, but it's definitely visually destabilizing. So is a long droplet of wood glue overhanging the roof and dried in place like a bit of rogue impasto. And this, you have to see it from above and in real life to see what I mean. I think the other view I took has a better view of it. Buchanan lived from 1940 to 2015, mostly in the Northeast, before heading to Macon, Georgia for a teaching job in 1983. She stayed in that position for 2 years before relocating to before going back to the Bronx in New York. Here is how she described her interest in these forms in the mid-1990s. Quote, I would look at shacks, and the ones that attracted me always had something a little different or odd about them. This evolved into my having to deal with the fact that I'm making portraits of a family or person, end quote. Buchanan associated structural oddity to personal idiosyncrasy. These structures addressed both. It wasn't until later that she found that the shacks also indirectly answered a figurative, I have a word missing here, like a figurative impulse. At the center of Buchanan's idea about this strain of her art, then, is a notion of indirect representation, fashioning shacks to make portraits of people possibly unknown and likely unseen, people imagined not just to exist, but to exist within the sheltering conditions of Buchanan's own making. There's something to be said about the fragility of these forms vis-a-vis literally anything that might be said about them. Just look at them. How much is it really reasonable to put on to something so slight? I will come back to this. I really admire the indirect approach here, the privacy that the subjects of Buchanan's representation maintain insofar as they aren't forced to relinquish it in the name of art. I also admire her frank accountability to her own delayed awareness that she was doing portraiture while setting out to create the first shacks. She created these, they kind of float in history. She made them on and off in great number from around 1985 to 2011. And most of them that I know anyway are undated. The longer I consider them in an awareness of these complexities, the more bewildering Buchanan's shacks become. I think they present us with an opportunity to be cherished, and that is an opportunity not to know what we're being offered, and therefore slowly and unsurely to feel our way into another person's imagining as their art represented it. Buchanan doesn't resolve my questions about these forms. In fact, her own irresoluteness on these questions crosses the chasm between us. Despite the shack's specific and schematic character and its native evocations of Southern vernacular architecture, an abstractness pervades, for me anyway. And I take from Buchanan the impression that the particular yet open form that I'm trying to describe is more or less consonant with what she assembled and put before us, particular and yet open. We both don't know precisely what this thing is, but our mutual involvement with how it is means that our distinct vectors of being intersect to create an opportunity to wonder together. Like a lot of other art, Buchanan's isn't, I think, for me to appropriate or take possession of with an idea or some other, highfalutin construction. And the art that I want to be involved with, anyway, doesn't want the kind of revision that's part and parcel of becoming a subject of discourse about art. More and more, I think of art when it is open in this way as something that I must share with its creators and with everyone else in the historical population of observers, especially, and sometimes most uncomfortably, with observers who have had things to say about this art. We're never really thinking about art alone. To stay alive to the otherness that I believe in is intrinsic to the experience of art, as I try to do, I try to do as much as I can of what I call side-by-side looking. And this is why I love so much what happens in classrooms, which for me are partly about thinking curiously together with others. Other people's ideas about these matters continually crowd and challenge ideas that I call my own, keeping mine off kilter, which is something that ideas need to be if they are to move, grow, and change. There's always more to see. The more of something you see, the larger its context grows, and the larger a context grows, the more reality it encompasses. Eventually, you realize that as soon as you arrive at an idea about what a given art is or does, something comes along to smash your idea to pieces. a gap opens between knowing art, on the one hand, as a lot of us who are schooled in it, in one way or another, do know art, and on the other, understanding it as real. Knowing art on the one hand and understanding it as real. I guess that's the relationship that I want to look at this evening. Common sense about expertise and its necessity operate this gap as though it isn't one. High knowledge in matters of art is very well established, institutionalized, and largely unchallenged. Almost absolute, it is esteemed for its reliability. Except for the very young, people instinctively associate art to expertise. The expertise needed to make it, or to make it good, or make it important by making knowledge about it, or make it accessible, or make what's needed to move art's special secrets from their hiding places to where folks can reach them. I would just observe that that's a lot of remaking what's already been made, and that it might be worthwhile from time to time to reflect on this redundancy, on what or who it really serves. It's terribly easy to over-respect expertise and in the process to lose sight of visual art. The notion of expertise as an absolute necessity in matters of art can impede someone in the pursuit of art. In fact, nothing, this is really controversial and something that we should debate, nothing blocks art's exercise of its own freedom quite like expertise about art, which is, of course, a way that loving art can look. Buchanan's shacks are hermetic, happening off somewhere, seeming to necessitate interpretation. You want to place them somewhere other than where Buchanan locates them. She said that they were in their own soup. This is her phrase, in their own soup. I think those are good words for where we find them too, but they don't explain very much. So you might want to reach away from their here and now, out of the soup, to grab onto something that can bring them within the reach of known knowns. Expertise is how you capture art like this. You can turn away towards her inspirations, Mary Bearden, Norman Lewis, Betty Saar, Louise Nevelson, Konstantin Brancusi, Jasper Johns, Milton Resnick, Mark Rothko, et al. You can turn towards Southern architecture or towards countless studies of Black vernacular material culture. You might turn towards the words that the artist has said with the idea of cherry-picking those words that seem most congenial to a reading that you would like to perform. I did that a few minutes ago. You want a clarity brighter than the one before you. You want a version of this art that feels better than the solitary and silent yet evocative entity under the bonnet, which offers little in the way of relief. There is relief in a concept that can house the sense data and its evocations alike. And that certainly sounds a lot more accommodating than soup. Many ways of getting this relief exist. We get graduate degrees, jobs, and accolades by engaging these forms of relief systematically and repetitively. This expert isn't so sure anymore. I think I was very sure for a long time until something happened and I wasn't. And it would be very useful to know what happened, but I'm not there yet. I'll let you know when I find out. I haven't located the primal scene of my doubt, so I suspect that in some measure that it's always been there. But I can say, and I think it matters, that I have had severe speech impediments ever since I was a child. Talking almost always has involved a combination of difficulty and shame. It was neither possible nor advisable to speak on every available occasion. I think that this taught me to respect the gap, which can be very wide, between something that I might say and something that I needed to say. Something that could be said, which is a lot, and something that needed to be said, which is a lot less. That didn't stop me spending decades writing sentences without endings and impassable paragraphs. Somehow the terrific hardness of writing was nothing compared to that of talking for me, and I had so much stored up. It makes sense that writing felt like relief. But a particularly annoying thing can happen when you... sorry, don't do that, speaker. A particularly annoying thing can happen when you stutter, which is people telling you what you're trying to say. It's almost always well meant, and there have been times when when I deeply appreciate accurate interpolations of my speech, when an inner me of sorts felt heard. But being spoken for also engendered a high sensitivity to words that issue from assumption or from assumed familiarity, from stereotype, incuriousness, projection, self-indulgent description, overinterpretation, and other means of using language to falsify the beings and things of the world. And we are all unreliable narrators from time to time, so there's lots of room for improvement. Expert fluency can drastically alter or even short circuit the account that a given artwork is already giving of itself. Understanding how needs recognizing when and how the words around art, the ones we put there, I mean words that are not native to the art itself, effect conformity or consistency with concepts from before and outside a writer's experience of that art, especially when they are self concepts. I'm talking about legitimized, conventionalized ways of using art that involve individuals taking actions against art that can be difficult to distinguish from force. By force, I mean the application of concepts undeterred by the realities of artworks, as when we issue self-concepts socially undeterred by the realities of others, as though the world was a non-resistant medium. If more experts considered artists and their works to be entitled to a treatment consistent with the kind of love of art that we are widely presumed to harbor, then one would need to redraw the scope of expertise considerably to include the promotion of artists' advantage and of art's own advantage. We would have to, I think, spend a lot of time imagining what that would be, because that imagining has not been a terribly important project for art history until now. Expertise of that kind might even need an ethic, wanting what's good for art, taking practical measures to put that good ahead of the expert's own. That might mean something like self-denial on the part of the art expert, a denial at least of my private reason, by which I mean my sharply honed taste, my convictions, and the knowledge that I've spent decades building up through looking and reading and all that. After all, one thing that an expert is someone to whom we grant permission never to delay or doubt the use of their own private reason in dealing with the subjects and beneficiaries of their expertise. People direct their entire minds to art in order to cultivate their private reason. And our own, our arguments, our ways of making arguments, our rhetoric, categories, their prestige, and so forth. It is these latter that art must ultimately serve. And I'm not sure that's quite the right order. Art regularly beclouds the path of our private reason. But we're accustomed to hearing from experts only or almost only once there has been a favorable change in the weather. During the pandemic, I had to think about art very differently than I ever had to think about it before. Like most of you, I wasn't able to use it in the customary ways during quarantine and radical social distancing, which lasted a very long time where I was living. There weren't any weekly trips to the Art Institute and the MCA. Impoverished reproductions were all the art that I could find and felt like a terrible way to discover new things. But if I wanted art, which I did badly, I had to engage these things or consult an equally impoverished memory bank of past encounters. The entirety of my art life during much of that period revolved around ordinary inconveniences like this, all of which brought me face to face with the gap between art as I knew it and art as it really existed at that time and as it really exists in history. Sometimes it's just not as available as we want it to be. I grew fascinated with aspects of what I call the people-art relation. I'm just putting this here because it's a strange construction and I want you to see what I'm saying. I can unpack it later if you want, please don't ask. But I became fascinated, but this was one of these pandemic, some people baked, I thought about this, you know. I grew fascinated with aspects of the people-art relation that I had taken for granted or only been half conscious of until that point. One of those aspects was new, as far as I can tell, and I'm referring to people online missing art and talking about it a lot. Like, I miss art so much. I saw this in so many different ways people let each other know, and I think it was a way of seeking and finding community in the art world that dissipated and left us during this time. You know, it was a way of doing something important and necessary and nurturant, but it was also just a really strange and new kind of noise. You know, I miss art so much. I heard this a lot, and I couldn't help but wonder if art missed us back. I had to ask, like, do you, you know, I just try to think like art for a second. Is art in? Is it going? Where are all those people coming with all those demands and I thought my hunch that maybe it didn't. Maybe it didn't. Maybe art enjoyed the reprieve. I don't mean galleries and institutions that suffered terribly from the lack of. I don't mean that at all. I mean the art. You know, I'm trying to think like art, whatever that means. It's completely mystical and surprising to me that here I am, but here I am. The campus where I teach was, of course, a ghost town. I went anyway one day because I needed a book from my office. Technically, I was trespassing and for this reason probably hustling to get out without being noticed on camera or something, but I was slowed down by the tableau of frozen campus activities suggested by scores of pasted and stapled notices on various physical message boards. A particularly wordy flyer announced the meeting of a poetics workshop. It bore a message, I think unattributed, whose influence I have not been able to shake. Here's the message. I took a picture, which I can't find, and I went home and I typed it out and I stuck it all over my apartment. I was working, I had to write throughout the pandemic, so I wanted this everywhere. It says, I can love you because I want to feel less alone, or I can love you because I want you to feel less alone. But only the latter requires me to imagine a consciousness independent of my own and equally real. This jolted me. Really, it still jolts me because it's touching something that feels like it's always been a part of me, but not alive somehow. But it ought to have been alive. Now it is, and I need to learn to live with it. I can't promise you that art thoughts were my first thoughts on reading these words. But as soon as I made the association to art, I felt these words to be a dispatch from a kind of enlightened observer, the observer that I want to be. It seems to express a love of art more genuine than the love of art that we profess or are presumed often to have. Anyway, this is a way that the world made me think in that moment, not only about myself, but generally about relationality, and particularly about what may be at stake in a professional relationship with art. Whatever this is, it made me think about what someone paid to explain art can do to promote the conditions that art needs to move freely along its line of life. This thinking is showing me how truly radically personal and circumstance dependent uptake should be, how hard it is, in fact, to see art with one's own eyes, and how inhospitable to art it can be to do what comes naturally, especially when you have a lot of training in art and dealing with it. Unless a work exists to dole out uncomplicated pleasure, which some art does, it's just there to make you feel good, it may be as crucial as it is difficult to ascertain an artwork's demands upon me. It's not just there to do something for me. Sometimes it's not just there to do something for me. Sometimes it needs something from me. Perhaps it's asking me to move, or to feel, or to tolerate confusion, or to think, with no guarantee of a payoff. Rarely does the art that I'm talking about ask me to remain exactly as I was before my encounter. I thank the emotional and social intensities of the pandemic, as many of us lived it, for making it possible for me to really take on this message. All the signs of the punishing division in contemporary political culture were present then, the one that we're dealing with now, and not talking about tonight for the time being, anyway, were present. All the signs were present in incipient forms. I took this as a thundering admonishment, almost a warning, even though its tone is clearly otherwise. A warning to get some conscious control of the loneliness that I tend to assuage by turning the art of others to my own purposes. For instance, with Buchanan's shacks. At bottom, in the gallery this morning, and again later, I hope, and certainly at other moments in my life, it's just them and me, a severe arrangement of object and subject. Consciousness of this severity increases my capacity to determine what it would mean to be there for the work, to receive what Buchanan used the work to offer me, and not solely for the gain of an argument that I might make about Buchanan or about black artists or whatever the case may be. And out of that consciousness, somehow to determine what might need to be said, and not solely what could be said about these works. There are but two, and these are but two works of one prolific, multi-talented soul, and this is no occasion for generalizing. It is the month of the year in which we do that, but I'm not going to do that. It is a low point for sure in Black political history, but I'm still not going to do that. I make regular returns to a passage in a late lecture from 2016 when Toni Morrison talks about a time in her life as a writer when she had forgotten, in her words, how imagery and stylish language can help us in the human project. As she defines it in those Norton lectures, that project is, quote, to remain human and block the dehumanization of others, end quote. It's clear to her, and she assumes that it's clear to her reader, how imagery and stylish language can hinder us in the human project. But she leaves it to her reader to determine how they can help. One way they can help is by serving as a means to revise, to offer language more lovingly, even if that means holding language back. Taking care when we write and speak about art to keep art in the realm of relations and to curtail its use in producing irresponsible and dangerous caricatures, either of art or of society, this, I do believe, can help us in the human project. Perhaps what's most important to me about an exhibition like Silver Linings is the number of opportunities it offers to see some of the many ways there have been, so far, of being a Black artist. Daring to be Black and an artist is one of the most conjectured about pursuits that you could adopt in the last century of this country's history. And owing precisely to all of that conjecture, finding one's way to a self that is really one's own can be fraught, to say the least. An exhibition like this one also presents many opportunities to see how a limited number of individuals, on the one hand, directed the resources that art made available to them, and on the other hand, negotiated selfhood and representativeness, or the condition of having to lend yourself to never-ending fantasies about the collective racial identity. It may be clear by now that I feel these opportunities are best taken, the opportunities to consider these matters are best taken personally, according to one's interest and capacity, artwork to artwork. I think they cannot be generalized about and should not be generalized about, even though the temptation to do this is ever present and very strong. How these questions matter comes down to how they matter to you. My own once upon a time thoughts about them are duly recorded elsewhere, and some of those thoughts happen to touch on artists represented in the show. So if there's a lingering curiosity about particular connections that I might make between stuff that's in the rooms and stuff that I've said or written previously, I'm happy to speak to that later. There are also, of course, large institutional historical questions of equally real importance. How did Spelman collect? What did they collect? Did they collect for women or for a more encompassing idea of the student? How did pedagogy flow from their holdings? Who could see this art? Under what conditions? And who could not? How did other disciplines at the college make use of this invaluable material? Looking back on all of it now, what decisions has the college taken in framing, narrating, and traveling its collection as it has in this particular historical moment? Which has changed a great deal since the idea to travel it first took root, of course. It is particularly striking to me that Spelman began collecting visual art fully a quarter century before cultural authorities like W.E.B. Du Bois began publicly defining Negro art and being taken very seriously in the act of doing so. his very famous and important to read, to know, especially in the context of this exhibition, The Criteria of Negro Art, was published in a magazine of his called The Crisis in 1926. Spelman began collecting in 1899, so they enjoyed 27 years of freedom to do whatever they wanted before the most resonant voice in Black America about how Black Negro American culture was to look got going. That's a very important, a very important freedom to study. You know, they didn't. You know, there were murmurings about it. Even Du Bois had ideas that were known in 1899, but they weren't as directed and programmatic. They weren't criteria yet. They were just notions. Anyhow, 27 years of institutionally self-directed activity promoting art adds up to a picture of artistic excellence and cultural representation that is worthy of study in itself and likely to be a singular contribution to American history, to the study of American history. And as far as I know, it hasn't been done. If there's a book or a dissertation, I'm sorry, I missed it. I looked, but I didn't look everywhere. So I apologize if I'm showing glaring ignorance of something iconic or canonical. Silver linings is a celebration. The word is in the title. I didn't remember that when I wrote this sentence, but it is. It's in the title. And as much as celebration calls for exuberance, it also calls for delicacy. To me, the message that I shared earlier about love seems relevant because it speaks to the thin line between affection and dehumanization, with particular regard to the other and their works. It's thinking about the company in which others find themselves when we indulge our adoration and fascination. It's thinking, or making me think, about what it means to have space for the other, or even to be a space in which the other can set up and resonate without relinquishing any of its freedom. And I'm going to talk about this freedom thing later because I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable using it without defining my terms at this moment. I'm sorry. Sorry. It's making me think about what it means to have space for the other, even to be a space in which the other can set up and resonate without relinquishing any of its freedom. It got me thinking about a relationship to art that isn't formatted in advance, as by a method or an ideology or presumptions that demand stuff from art, or only concerns itself with certain of art's aspects. Historically speaking, Black art in the United States has existed in large part to satisfy those who come to it with demands and goals. Black art got organized to answer needs distinct from those of many Black artists. I myself, in the work that I have done as a writer and other kinds of mediums, have preferred to center the sometimes fraught, always uneven relationships between demand and supply in the realm of African American artists. And honestly, I think my love tends to increase when artists do things that fly in the face of prevailing demand, when the moves that they make exceed the circumscribed realm of permissible maneuvers. I'm going to skip that. Elsewhere, I have compared this way of coming up to art with demands that it must satisfy to using art as a mirror. Stated more directly, I think this disposition towards art and artists fails to realize the extent to which art is not a transparent window onto otherness, even when observer and observed happen to share something as profound as an identity. Of course, I am as susceptible as anyone to going to art in search of my reflection. Thinking with the quote about love has been a way to make sure that my enthusiastic accord with so-and-so's attitude toward the cultural, or so-and-so artist's attitude toward the cultural order, doesn't stop me noticing what makes their art what it is, doesn't stop me accurately registering what they're trying to put across, to put in my way. Even in passionate argument, otherness and difference always pertain. So that's where I am at nowadays in a bit of a conflict between some of my obligations as a professional art historian and this strong feeling that the more I love art, the worse the love gets. Um, I apologize if this means you're not getting precisely what you came here for this evening. Um, so as I said, I took an shortly after receiving the invitation and having a look at what was going to be in the exhibition, I made the decision to talk about Buchanan, but I did so without knowing a great deal about why. Um, I want to make sure that it's clear that when I talk about Buchanan, I do not mean her as the historical personage, nor even the corpus of art that she left us, nor even a personal representation of Buchanan. I mean Buchanan as the inchoate object of a love that I do not understand. Buchanan as the provider of an experience, a succession of experiences over some years that seem to me inexhaustible and therefore very difficult to communicate out of. I almost just want to point at the work and just point and say, look at that. Just go be with that. Go be silent with that for as long as you can. Something's going to happen. That's, that's if I could get away with saying only that, we would have been finished 25 minutes ago. Um, I don't have that. I don't have that quite that much temerity, but anyway. Um, while thinking about what I would say today, what I do think I know something about, I looked and also having to consider the sort of existential shape I'm in the last few weeks. I looked for a long time at this definition of equanimity. The dictionary I had at my disposal when I first decided to meditate on this was defining it as follows: mental calmness, composure, and evenness of temper, even especially in a difficult situation. It is accurate to say that I meditated on equanimity in search of the equanimity that I needed to bring my thoughts in order and to find a way to communicate them to you that felt like it could be useful in some way. It would even be true to say that staring at these words calms something in me, some desire to know right now and exactly what I think about things, what it is that I make of this very turbulent, corrosive, and enervating, and frankly, terrifying time in the world. Um, like a lot of us, I spend most of my time in the last few weeks wondering how what I do fits into redress, fits into a solution, fits into a positive strategy for dealing with what we're dealing with. I had a really important conversation with Dulce and Errol at lunch about connection, about the work that I think a lot of us do that involves centers around working towards connection, um, um, engendering belief in connection, healthy connection between people, obviously, but also between people and things that have something to put across, that mean to be connected, that exist to be connected with. Um, so there is equanimity for me to be found in dwelling on the aspect of this work that can, if it's thoughtful and not too full of itself, that can feed into a connection and model connection or provoke engagement with I guess the remaining possibilities of connection. Anyhow, um, we all in times when we need equanimity, we often also need escapes, and those are by far the most popular and probably organismically efficient way of handling a time like this, given how much else we all have going on. But I think escapes may also be a part of the problem we're having, in as much as the more escaping we do, the harder it becomes to operate the ordinary, which is full of inconveniences and complexities that we can't just wish away. Um, the way that I see it, this will not come as a surprise to you at this point, art is not an escape place. It is not a place to go for relief from ordinary inconveniences and complexities. To the contrary, it is ordinary, and it is ordinary in the sense that with art, at every point, it is a question of our treatment of others and by others. At this very moment, I mean Buchanan, but I also mean all art, all of the time. When a self-proclaimed serious person is professing to be serious about it, to take it seriously. Just like operating an ordinary, full of inconveniences and complexities, with art you have to be adept at adapting, only you don't really have to be. There are all kinds of ways around the need for adaptation in realms of art, a lot of which feel like love because we experience them as attachment. So one of the ways around exposure to otherness and difference that feel like love and therefore don't really help with connection. These are two of the stranger angles I could find this morning on the the only two shacks in the show. I showed that to you because they show, these reviews that showed me more than I thought I would find. And hopefully they tell you a little bit about what these are. Things aren't as intellectual as they can appear to intellectuals. Like the taxi, airports, and planes that I use to get here when we're with art, we're in a very basic interhuman situation. Much of the same stuff that matters when we're with each other matters when we seek experience in the places that we call art. When it seems to be just one of Buchanan's shacks and me, it isn't. Before either one of us, there was an artist who is deposited here. Before her, there was a subject which is deposited here. I need to see and hear all these on their own terms. This can only happen according to my willingness and my capacities. In other words, for this art, everything depends on who shows up and what condition they show up in. So when I say see and hear, I don't mean them in an abstract or categorical way at all. It's I who must see and hear, or live with the fact that I wouldn't. Given the opportunity to meet their offerings with a fair sighting and a fair hearing, do I take it or don't I? I'm invited to see my way to an experience of the new and different, even though I may not be in the mood to take on any risk, to risk any surprise, to meet any difference. Do I accept the invitation or decline it? To have an experience of this art, I must not reach it solely by a detour through what's already familiar to me, through what I already have a name or a category of experience for, or trained fluency in. What a funny word to stutter on, fluency. Or a trained fluency in. It's not about going to the, for me, it's not about going to the museum and having transcendent things happen. It's about going to the museum and having a lot of encounters, and maybe having an experience that your memory and your desire don't recognize and can't parse. An experience that draws you out of yourself as you understand that self, takes you beyond the self you already know, perhaps to a self that you don't already know, and perhaps to one that you have to assemble especially for the occasion. This may sound very wacky or like a lot of work. I think it can be both and powerfully true at the same time. That's my conviction as of today. When you encounter Buchanan's shacks, if you haven't already, I want to have done as little as possible to shape or direct the quality of attention that you pay to them. And I admit that's hard for me. It feels a bit like sleeping at the wheel on purpose. But right now, doing what I can for the work is much more important to me than being clever about it. One thing I can do is to suggest that you try to perceive what's only perceivable once you get experts and expertise or the desire for expertise out of the way. These forms evident fragility matters. I can't say how it matters, but I'm telling you from encounter upon encounters since 2011 when I first met them, that the fragility is something that stays with you. It vibrates. I think it's a way that the artist impels us to reach towards something that we mustn't grasp too tightly. A way to secure privacy for the portrait subjects that that she saw in these objects only retroactively. In the same year that the U.S. House of Representatives passed the resolution that would abolish slavery, Dostoevsky wrote, "There is no greater pain than to feel as a stranger among people." Alas, Buchanan, especially with her shacks, puts us in that very strangeness again and again and again and again. There are a lot of them. They're often displayed serially, so it is like a steady stream of the strange, and it can be very affecting. In the version of art that I find myself promoting, artist and observer alight together on an object in order to investigate what is becoming. It is altogether against our nature not to feel robbed when objects this embedded in realism do not yield up accomplished narratives. And I think it's the same with people. We grow frustrated by strangers who remain strange to us after any ample period of acquaintance. What matters is what we do with that frustration. Does it herald a rejection, or is attention directed to the character and mood of my interaction with them, of my understanding of the world that we share? Hopefully that is a new understanding. Another black artist who worked in assemblage, Noah Purifoy is his name, he's someone I have been researching for the last 9 years, is not represented in Silver Linings, but he spoke to this subject in 1966 in the catalog of an exhibition, 66 Signs of Neon, that he and Judson Powell made in the wake of the Watts Rebellion in Los Angeles, showing artworks created from the ruins of the so-called riots. Purifoy, in a brief text, discusses art in the context of communication. And without any hesitation at all, he asserts that ordinary social intercourse and art viewing are perfectly analogous activities. Obviously, there's a lot of common sense there, but it's the kind of common sense that undermines willfully obscure academic argument, a lingua franca of art experts. Nothing undermines art's possibility of reaching people and being reached by people, quite like expertise undermines those conditions. He said, "The only hope is communication. In that, a me and a you is affected permanently." In making his point, Purifoy makes the me-you dyad singular and shifts registers, adopting the voice of an artwork. It says, "I don't have anybody but you," and the all caps are his. It's on a page other than the one that I'm showing you. "I don't have anybody but you." Listen to that for a moment. Imagine one of your favorite artworks confiding that in you. I don't have anybody but you. At the very moment that you may be imagining, it's actually true. The work hasn't got a body. So you are its best shot at life at that moment. It'll be someone else at another moment. But in any of these very discrete situations, it's clear when you think about it in Purifoy's starkly humanistic terms that art gains a significant measure of its vitality from an interhuman dynamic. It's probably not news and more like a reminder. A reminder of what? A reminder that when I go to art, love for art as a general category may not be enough. Deep respect for the mind or personality from which it came, however little I may know about them, or however much I may not appreciate what I do know, can go a long way toward real insight, real perception. I cannot behave as though I am alone, as though only my experience counts, as though it's perfectly fine to make a stranger familiar by whatever means I have at my disposal. And I do not know what I am going to see, and I will not know unless I respect the actual experience that is being made available to me. When Purifoy's fictional artwork calls for full involvement from its observer, it's also informing us that we actively hinder art in its work when we do not lend ourselves to it fully. And there are countless ways in which we fail to receive what we otherwise delight in calling artistic expression, in which we make the expression about us. It's about us when we go to art intending to take something home, such as edification or new information about other people places. It's about us when we use art to build out or reinforce some idea that we've found or cooked up, to think thoughts that we were going to think anyway. And it's about us when we use art to illustrate stories that the artist did not personally endorse. If, at the end of the day, we are responsible for one another, who's to say that art is a place where that doesn't apply? As wonderful as art can be, the cool and worthy stuff that I can do with that wonder may be less important than following that wonder to thinking that honors art's deep roots in the sacredness of human beings, their creations, and the world. Relatedness of this kind isn't intellectual. Less than what an intellect brings to the table, it may need a present and available witness, not in a hurry and with no presumptions at all. Thank you for listening.